The flight was almost halfway through when it happened. The aircraft lurched violently, sending a sudden wave of panic through the passengers. A few gasps filled the cabin as the seatbelt signs flashed on, their bright red lights cutting through the dimmed overhead. People scrambled to tighten their belts, gripping their armrests, eyes wide with fear. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, but it was garbled and faint. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. Among the sea of faces, one person remained unervingly calm. A young woman, perhaps in her early 30s, sat rigidly in her seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her lips, painted a shade of red so bright it almost seemed unnatural, barely moved. Her eyes locked on the soldier sitting next to her. She had noticed him the moment she sat down. His uniform, the polished boots, the creased pants, and that tired, worn look in his eyes, it all screamed war hero to her, someone who probably thought he deserved respect, maybe even admiration. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that irritated her. Was he really all that? People like him, the ones who walked around with medals and stories, always seemed to think they were above everyone else. But in her eyes, he was just another man. Another person who would eventually fade into the background of life, just like the rest of them. She couldn't hold back her disdain. The plane shuddered again, and she turned sharply toward him, her voice cutting through the tense silence of the cabin. "Do you really think you're a hero?" she said, louder than necessary. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. A challenge. The soldier, who had been staring out the window, didn't flinch. His face was drawn, eyes distant, as if the question didn't even register. The air around them thickened with discomfort, as though the entire cabin was holding its breath. He didn't even acknowledge her, just kept staring out into the vast expanse of clouds that seemed to stretch on forever. Her irritation grew, and she pressed on, leaning in a little closer. "Do you think people like you actually make a difference? All that talk about sacrifice and duty, for what? Just to come home and be treated like a hero? It's all so meaningless." Her words hung in the air, cutting deeper than she intended. Still, no response. The soldier didn't even blink. But that's when she noticed it, something in his eyes. A faint flicker of something, maybe hurt or confusion, but it was gone so quickly she wasn't sure. It wasn't until a few minutes later, when the plane suddenly dropped, jolting everyone out of their seats, that the true gravity of the situation hit. The oxygen masks popped out from above, swinging wildly as the aircraft dipped again. People screamed in panic, some crying, some just staring, wide-eyed. The soldier's hand shot out instinctively, gripping the armrest, knuckles white. His eyes locked onto the woman, this time, not with the distant, detached expression he had worn before, but with something far deeper. Something darker. She wasn't sure if it was the fear creeping up her spine or the strange, electric connection in his gaze, but her heart skipped a beat. Then, just as quickly, the turbulence stopped. The plane steadied. The seatbelt lights blinked off, and the crew began moving down the aisles, reassuring passengers with calm voices and soft smiles. The soldier, still clutching his seat, turned toward the woman. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, he spoke. "You don't understand, do you?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried enough weight to make her ears ring. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Understand what?" He sighed, his hand falling away from the armrest. "It's not about heroism. It never was. It's just survival." And then, before she could respond, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, barely audible. "We've just received some unsettling news, ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice said, tense and strained. "Please remain seated and calm. We'll be updating you shortly." The woman frowned, turning toward the front of the plane, but her thoughts raced. What had the soldier meant? Heroism? Survival? She was about to ask him when a sudden, strange feeling crept over her, a sense of dread, the kind that makes your skin crawl. She couldn't shake the thought that there was more to this man than she had assumed. And she needed to know what that was. A few hours later, the plane landed. The ground felt solid, reassuring, but the unease in her chest didn't dissipate. As she deboarded, she stole a final glance at the soldier, who stood quietly near the exit, his eyes scanning the crowd. She almost wanted to go over to him, apologize for her words, but something stopped her. The memory of his gaze, so filled with sorrow and regret, made her hesitate. It was as if she had touched something deep inside him, something that had shaken him to his core. The next morning, she woke up early. Her alarm had gone off too soon, but she couldn't go back to sleep. Something about the events of the night before, something in that man's quiet words, kept playing over and over in her mind. She poured herself a cup of coffee, staring out the window, her thoughts a blur. But then, as she turned to check her phone, her stomach dropped. The news headline, bold and glaring on the screen, hit her like a punch to the gut. Soldier killed in attack abroad, heroic sacrifice saves lives. She stared at the headline, her heart racing. The soldier. The man she had mocked. He was dead. Killed in action, saving lives, just as he had said, just as he had tried to make her understand. Her fingers trembled as she read the article. It wasn't just about his death. It was about the heroism of his sacrifice. The lives he had saved, the dangerous mission he had volunteered for. The tragedy of a man who, until that moment, she had dismissed as nothing more than a soldier who thought too highly of himself. She felt a wave of guilt wash over her. He wasn't a hero. He had been more than that. Her eyes blurred with tears as the realization sank in, the weight of it almost too much to bear. What kind of person had she been, to look at this man and mock him, to judge him without ever knowing who he truly was? She had been wrong. So terribly wrong. And in that moment, she knew she would never forget the soldier she had insulted. His death would haunt her forever, a stark reminder of the judgment we pass without understanding the true cost of things. And what's worse, she had never even gotten the chance to apologize. The morning after reading the news felt like a nightmare that wouldn't end. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the soldier's face, the look in his eyes as she'd insulted him, the flicker of pain she hadn't understood at the time. It gnawed at her, a constant reminder of her thoughtless words. She could almost hear his voice, that quiet, heavy tone, telling her she didn't understand. And she didn't. The more she thought about it, the worse it got. It wasn't just that he was dead. It was the realization that she had judged him too quickly, as so many do. She had seen a uniform, a title, a man she assumed had his life figured out, and yet, she had mocked him. She had torn down a man who was likely doing everything in his power to protect people, to keep others safe, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. But this wasn't a time for self-pity. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit in her apartment, racked with guilt. The feeling of regret was consuming her, but she had a sense that the story wasn't over. There was more to this soldier's life than what had been shared in the headlines, something that needed to be uncovered. She had to find out what it was. That afternoon, as she sipped her coffee and stared blankly at the empty street outside her window, the thought hit her. What if his death wasn't the end of the story? What if there was something more? A mystery she hadn't yet discovered. A reason she had crossed paths with him, something beyond chance, something fated. She couldn't just leave it here. She had to know who he was, what he had been through, and why she felt like there was something she had missed. The search began that evening. She started with the newspaper article. It was sparse, as most reports about soldiers' deaths tended to be. His name, rank, and a few lines about his service. The story mentioned a mission in the Middle East. A last-minute deployment for a rescue operation that had gone wrong. He had led a team into enemy territory, and during a firefight, his team had been pinned down. His sacrifice had allowed his men to escape, but it had cost him his life. But that wasn't enough. She needed to know more. This man, this soldier, he was someone more than the shallow description the media had painted. There had to be more. She spent hours scrolling through online archives, trying to dig deeper. She dug into military databases, hoping to find something personal about him. And then, in a small local news forum, she found it. Private First Class Jonathan Wright. It wasn't much, just a post from an old friend, a man who seemed to know him well. The post described Jonathan as humble, hardworking, a man who never talked about his service and certainly never talked about the pain of what he had seen. There was no mention of medals or accolades, no talk about his heroism. Instead, the post spoke of a quiet man who always put others first, a man who had struggled with the aftermath of his service but kept it all to himself. The kind of person who would sit alone in a corner of a room, listening, always present but never drawing attention to himself. Her stomach churned. This was the man she had mocked. The soldier who didn't even see himself as a hero? There was one more detail that caught her eye, a sentence buried deep in the middle of the post. I remember the last time I saw him. He was on a plane, heading back home, and he was as quiet as ever, but there was something different in his eyes. Like he knew something, something none of us were prepared for. She stared at the words, her pulse quickening. Could it be? Was this the same plane? She dug further, and in the comments below the post, someone replied. It was an older woman, someone who mentioned a connection to Jonathan's mother. She'd seen the soldier just days before he left for his last mission, and she too spoke of a change in him. A heaviness. Something that had been weighing on him, though he hadn't shared it. She had to know more. There was something about the way these people spoke about Jonathan, something in the language they used, that made her feel as though she had stumbled upon something important. Something that, maybe, had a reason for her involvement. She made a decision. She would track down the people who had known him. She had to speak to them. If anyone could shed light on the mystery surrounding his life, it was them. The next day, she found herself at a small, quiet cemetery on the outskirts of town, standing before the gravestone of Jonathan Wright. The air was cold, but there was a stillness here that seemed to hold its own kind of reverence. It didn't feel like a place of mourning, it felt like a place of reflection, as though the silence around her was keeping secrets. His headstone was simple, modest. No extravagant symbols or military honors, just a name, a date, and a short phrase. A last-minute deployment for a rescue operation that had gone wrong. He had led a team into enemy territory, and during a firefight, his team had been pinned down. His sacrifice had allowed his men to escape, but it had cost him his life. But that wasn't enough. She needed to know more. This man, this soldier, he was someone more than the shallow description the media had painted. There had to be more. She spent hours scrolling through online archives, trying to dig deeper. She dug into military databases, hoping to find something personal about him. And then, in a small local news forum, she found it. Private First Class Jonathan Wright. It wasn't much, just a post from an old friend, a man who seemed to know him well. The post described Jonathan as humble, hardworking, a man who never talked about his service and certainly never talked about the pain of what he had seen. There was no mention of medals or accolades, no talk about his heroism. Instead, the post spoke of a quiet man who always put others first, a man who had struggled with the aftermath of his service but kept it all to himself. The kind of person who would sit alone in a corner of a room, listening, always present but never drawing attention to himself. Her stomach churned. This was the man she had mocked. The soldier who didn't even see himself as a hero? There was one more detail that caught her eye, a sentence buried deep in the middle of the post. I remember the last time I saw him. He was on a plane, heading back home, and he was as quiet as ever, but there was something different in his eyes. Like he knew something, something none of us were prepared for. She stared at the words, her pulse quickening. Could it be? Was this the same plane? She dug further, and in the comments below the post, someone replied. It was an older woman, someone who mentioned a connection to Jonathan's mother. She'd seen the soldier just days before he left for his last mission, and she too spoke of a change in him. A heaviness. Something that had been weighing on him, though he hadn't shared it. She had to know more. There was something about the way these people spoke about Jonathan, something in the language they used, that made her feel as though she had stumbled upon something important. Something that, maybe, had a reason for her involvement. She made a decision. She would track down the people who had known him. She had to speak to them. If anyone could shed light on the mystery surrounding his life, it was them. The next day, she found herself at a small, quiet cemetery on the outskirts of town, standing before the gravestone of Jonathan Wright. The air was cold, but there was a stillness here that seemed to hold its own kind of reverence. It didn't feel like a place of mourning, it felt like a place of reflection, as though the silence around her was keeping secrets. His headstone was simple, modest. No extravagant symbols or military honors. A hero in silence. The words haunted her. A hero in silence. It didn't fit the image she had painted in her mind, the one where soldiers were always larger than life, always expected to be brave and vocal about their sacrifices. Jonathan had been different. So different. She stood there for a moment, taking in the silence. Then she heard footsteps behind her, and turned. A man stood at a distance, watching her closely. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. He had the look of someone who had spent years hiding pain behind a mask. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Who are you?" she asked, instinctively stepping back. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes scanning her face. "I'm Kyle. I was Jonathan's friend. I knew him for a long time. We served together." The name hit her like a lightning bolt. Kyle, he was the one who had posted that message online, the one who had mentioned the plane. "I need to know what happened," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "I need to know what changed. Why did he seem so different? Was there something wrong? What was he hiding?" Kyle looked at her with a strange intensity, his eyes narrowing as though he was deciding whether or not to trust her. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke. He didn't want anyone to know. Not even me. But I think he knew his time was running out. You see, Jonathan had been through more than any of us realized. The stuff he saw in combat, it broke him. But it wasn't just the war. It was something else. Something that came before it. She took a step closer, her heart pounding. "What do you mean? What was it?" He looked away, swallowing hard, before he spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "There was a woman. He loved her. But she never knew. He kept her a secret. I don't know why, but he did. And when we were on that mission, he had her name on his mind the whole time. He kept repeating it, like a prayer, like something he couldn't shake." Her breath caught in her throat. What was her name? Kyle's gaze was distant now, lost in memory. "I don't know. But I think you might. I think you might know the woman he was talking about." The world around her seemed to stop, the gravity of his words hitting her with full force. Could it be? Could Jonathan have been thinking about her all along? Was she the woman in his thoughts, the one he had tried to protect, the one whose words had torn him apart? She could feel the walls closing in. The mystery was deeper than she could have ever imagined. The cemetery felt colder now, the air heavier, as though the very ground beneath her feet was weighed down by the unspoken truths that had been buried here. The man in front of her, Kyle, had dropped a bombshell, one that she wasn't quite ready to process. Jonathan had loved her. Jonathan had kept a secret, a woman he never spoke of, a name that had been his silent prayer in his final moments. She had never known. Not once had Jonathan spoken to her about anything like that. Not a single word had passed between them to suggest there was more to him than the quiet soldier she had mocked. She could feel the weight of regret pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. The guilt from what she had said to him, from how she had judged him, now seemed insurmountable. But Kyle's next words would only deepen the confusion, the mystery that now surrounded her. "Do you remember the flight? The one you were on with him?" Kyle asked, his eyes sharp, probing. "I think that's when it all started." Her mind raced, pulling her back to the events of the night before his death. The moments on the plane when Jonathan had been so quiet, so distant. She had mocked him without ever realizing the weight he was carrying. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" Kyle sighed, his breath visible in the cold air. He looked around, almost as if checking to see if anyone was listening. Jonathan wasn't just a soldier. He was part of something bigger. Something that had been set in motion long before he ever put on that uniform. A chill ran through her. "What do you mean, something bigger?" Kyle hesitated, glancing down at Jonathan's grave as though searching for the right words. There was a mission, a secret one. Only a few people knew about it. And Jonathan? He was a key player in it. She felt a knot form in her stomach. A secret mission? What kind of mission? Kyle's eyes met hers, his expression grave. It wasn't about fighting in wars or saving lives. It was about something more, personal. Something he had to do, whether he liked it or not. The words hung in the air, thick with a mystery she couldn't yet grasp. What was he trying to protect? She asked, her voice barely audible. Kyle swallowed hard, his jaw clenching. "That's what I need to find out. And I think you can help me." She stepped back, shaken. "I don't understand. How could I help you? I barely knew him. I insulted him, Kyle's face softened, a trace of sympathy in his eyes. "You didn't know. But you can help because you're connected to him in a way none of us ever were. You're the key to understanding what happened. And why he kept this secret." Her heart raced. "What do you mean?" "I don't know anything about his past, about this mission, about whatever it is you're talking about." Kyle's gaze grew intense. "I think you do know something. And I think it's tied to what happened on that flight." The words echoed in her mind as she sat in her apartment, staring blankly at the walls. Kyle's cryptic warning lingered, gnawing at her thoughts. She had been involved, whether she realized it or not. She had seen Jonathan's face, witnessed the change in him, but she had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her reverie. She glanced down to see a text message from an unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. "Meet me. I have something you need to see. 6 p.m. The usual spot. It was unsigned, but something about the tone of the message felt familiar. A sense of urgency and mystery that she had grown accustomed to. It had to be Kyle. She couldn't ignore it. Something told her that this was the moment where everything would come together, or fall apart. The usual spot was a small coffee shop near the corner of her street, a place Jonathan had frequented when he was home. It was quiet, dimly lit, with soft music playing in the background. She walked in, her heart pounding, and immediately saw Kyle sitting at a table in the corner. His face was drawn, eyes shadowed with worry, but when he saw her, he motioned for her to sit. She did so quickly, her eyes scanning the room, as if expecting someone else to show up. But it was just the two of them. "I didn't want to drag you into this," Kyle began, his voice low, "but I need your help." More than you realize. She nodded, the weight of his words pressing down on her. What's this all about? What was Jonathan involved in? And why do you think I can help? Kyle leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. It's about a man named Victor Kane. A name you probably won't know, but one that Jonathan was obsessed with for years. Victor Kane, she repeated, the name unfamiliar but haunting nonetheless. Who is he? Kyle's eyes flickered with something between fear and anger. Victor Kane is a man who controls things behind the scenes. He's untouchable. A mastermind in a world of shadows. He runs an organization, a secretive, dangerous one. And Jonathan was part of it. Her mind spun. What do you mean, part of it? Jonathan wasn't a criminal. He was just a soldier. Kyle shook his head, his face hardening. That's what Jonathan wanted everyone to believe. But it wasn't the truth. He wasn't just protecting people on the battlefield. He was protecting them from Kane. She leaned in, trying to understand. What does that mean? What was Jonathan's role? Why didn't he ever say anything? Because if he did, his life, everyone he loved, would be in danger. The truth about Victor Kane and the things Jonathan was involved in would have been a death sentence. Kyle's voice dropped to a near whisper. Jonathan's mission wasn't just about war, it was about a conspiracy, one that goes back decades. And it involved more than just soldiers. It involved people at the highest levels of power, people who are still out there. Her heart skipped a beat. So, Jonathan knew something. Something that was dangerous. Kyle's eyes met hers, his expression grim. Exactly. And now that he's gone, it's up to us to stop Kane from doing whatever he's planning next. But there's more. Jonathan, he left behind clues. He left something for you, something you need to find. Clues, she repeated, disbelief creeping into her voice. What do you mean, clues? Kyle didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. The edges were frayed, the cover scuffed with use. He slid it across the table toward her. This is Jonathan's. He kept it with him everywhere he went. It's filled with notes, codes, and things that don't make sense. But I know there's something important in here. Something that will explain everything. Her hand shook as she reached for the notebook, feeling the weight of it in her palm. She opened it carefully, flipping through the pages. The writing was small, almost illegible in places. Some of it was in code, others were names, dates, and strange symbols. But one thing stood out. A name. A place. The Red Wolf. 6 p.m. September 17th. Her stomach dropped. It was the same time as the meeting. This doesn't make sense, she said, her voice trembling. What is this? Kyle's expression was unreadable. I don't know. But I think it's a clue. And I think it's tied to Victor Kane. The notebook felt heavier in her hands than it had any right to. Each page she flipped through seemed to drip with a sense of urgency and danger, a mystery that had been hidden away in plain sight for years. Her fingers lingered over the scribbled notes, the coded messages, and the cryptic symbols Jonathan had left behind. Every line seemed to pull her deeper into a world she didn't want to understand, but couldn't look away from. The more she uncovered, the more the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit into place, pieces that had been scattered in a way that Jonathan himself had never truly understood. The name, the Red Wolf, loomed large in her mind. The words were written in thick, bold strokes, standing out among the mess of half-complete thoughts and erratic, hasty scrawls. And yet, even with the note staring at her, she couldn't make sense of it. What was the Red Wolf? Why had Jonathan written it down so many times, alongside a time, a place, a date? She glanced up at Kyle, who sat across from her in the dimly lit coffee shop. His gaze was fixed on the notebook in her hands, his face tense, lips pressed into a thin line. "You said Jonathan left something for me," she whispered, her voice shaky. What did he mean by this? What is the Red Wolf? Kyle didn't immediately respond. His eyes drifted over her shoulder, looking out the window as if waiting for something. Or someone. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his seat, running a hand through his hair. "The Red Wolf is a code name," he said, his voice low. "A name tied to something much bigger than just a person. It's part of an operation, something that Jonathan was involved in from the very beginning. I didn't want to believe it at first, but now I don't have a choice." She felt a chill at the back of her neck. What kind of operation? Kyle's jaw tightened. An underground network. They call it the Red Wolf because it's both dangerous and elusive. It's a group of people, some with connections to international criminal organizations, others with ties to corrupt governments. But there's more to it than just that. It's not just about money or power. It's about control. Control over people, control over governments, control over the very forces that run the world. Her breath caught in her throat. Jonathan was involved with people like that? Kyle nodded, his eyes darkening. He wasn't just a soldier on the front lines. He was part of something far more covert. A part of a group working to stop the worst of what's out there. But it was dangerous. Too dangerous. And the deeper he got, the harder it became to get out. She swallowed hard. What does this have to do with me? Why would he leave this notebook for me? Why was I involved? Kyle's eyes softened, but only for a moment. You're more involved than you think. Jonathan didn't just love you, he trusted you. He saw something in you that none of us did. You were more than just someone he knew. You were part of the mission, even if you didn't know it. She shook her head, unable to comprehend. I never knew any of this. I had no idea he was involved in something like this. That's because Jonathan kept it from you. He kept it from everyone. But now that he's gone, it's up to us to finish what he started. She felt her pulse quicken. Finish what? The mission, Kyle replied, his voice steady but with a tinge of urgency. The mission Jonathan was on before he died. It's not over. And it's not just about Victor Kane anymore. It's bigger than that. She stared at him, her mind racing. What's bigger than Victor Kane? Kyle's expression hardened. A man named Arvid Stenholm. The name hit her like a punch to the gut. Arvid Stenholm. She'd heard it before, months ago, when Jonathan had been talking about a man he was trying to track down. Stenholm was infamous, a name whispered in the same breath as the world's most dangerous criminals. He was a man who could erase people from existence with the snap of his fingers, a man whose influence stretched across borders, across nations. Kyle noticed the shock on her face and pressed on. Stenholm is the key to everything. He's the one who controls the Red Wolf, the one who orchestrates everything from the shadows. If we want to stop Kane, we have to stop Stenholm. But how do we do that? She asked, her voice trembling. We don't even know where to find him. Kyle leaned forward, eyes narrowing. That's where Jonathan's notebook comes in. It's not just a collection of random notes, it's a map. A map to Stenholm's operations. And if we can decode it, we'll know exactly where to go. Her head spun. You want me to help you decode this? But I don't know anything about ciphers or secret codes. I'm not. You're exactly what Jonathan knew we would need, Kyle interrupted, his voice urgent. The Red Wolf's whole operation is built on secrets. But Jonathan knew that the one thing that could bring it down was the truth. And he trusted you to find it. She stared down at the notebook in her hands. The pages seemed to shift before her eyes, the letters dancing in front of her, as though they were mocking her inability to understand. The code seemed like an impenetrable wall, a mystery that was out of reach. But Jonathan had left her a trail to follow. She couldn't just walk away from it now, not when the stakes were this high. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll help you decode it. But you have to tell me everything you know about Arvid Stenholm. About the Red Wolf. About how all of this ties together." Kyle nodded grimly. "I'll tell you everything. But we need to hurry. Stenholm's people are already looking for Jonathan's notebook. They'll stop at nothing to get it back. If they realize we have it, they'll come after us." The gravity of his words settled on her like a heavy weight. It was no longer just about Jonathan's death. It was no longer just about finding answers. It was about survival. And the truth was darker and more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Hours passed in a blur. Kyle had brought her back to a small, safe house he'd rented on the outskirts of the city, a place far removed from prying eyes. The room was dim, the only light coming from a single desk lamp, casting long shadows on the walls. She sat at the table, notebook open in front of her, flipping through the pages in a desperate attempt to make sense of the chaos inside. Kyle was nearby, pacing, clearly agitated. He hadn't said much since they arrived, but the tension in the room was palpable. She could feel the weight of the danger pressing down on them. Her eyes flicked from the notebook to Kyle, who was still pacing, his face etched with concern. "You said there were clues in here," she said, trying to steady her breath. "But where? Where do we start?" Kyle stopped pacing and turned to face her. "We start with the symbols. The ones that look like nothing more than random scribbles." Her fingers hovered over the pages as she scanned the chaotic mess Jonathan had left behind. The symbols were unlike anything she'd seen before. Some looked like ancient runes, others were complex patterns, while some seemed to be nothing more than abstract shapes. "There's a pattern to it," she said, more to herself than to Kyle. "I can feel it. But it's not clear. Not yet." Kyle stepped closer, glancing at the page she was studying. "Take your time. It's going to take a while to figure this out. But we don't have a lot of it." As she turned the pages, something caught her eye, a word. The same word Jonathan had written down earlier. The Red Wolf. But this time, it was accompanied by a new set of symbols. Symbols that seemed to correlate with coordinates. Coordinates. Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly grabbed her phone and began typing them into a map application. When the map loaded, her stomach dropped. It led to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. This is it," she whispered. "This is where we need to go." Kyle nodded, his expression hardening. "Get ready. We have to move fast." The night was cold and thick with tension, the kind of stillness that felt almost unnatural. Every streetlight along the way to the warehouse flickered, casting shadows that seemed to shift with every step they took. She could hear the faint sound of her heartbeat in her ears as she followed Kyle through the alleyways, her mind racing. They had found the coordinates, the Red Wolf. The abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city was where they needed to go, but every instinct in her body screamed that this was a trap. It wasn't just a building on a map anymore, it was the heart of everything that had been hidden, the center of the storm Jonathan had tried to keep them from. Her hands were cold as she gripped her phone, the map still open with the coordinates burned into her memory. "This is where we'll find him, isn't it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as though speaking too loudly would trigger some kind of alarm. Kyle didn't answer right away. His face was grim, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The usual calm that had been his signature throughout this whole ordeal was gone, replaced by a raw edge of fear. But there was something else there, too. Something fierce. Determined. "Yes," he said, his voice steady despite the tension. "This is where we'll find the truth. But we have to be careful. This place isn't what it seems. The Red Wolf isn't just a name, it's a symbol, a marker of power. If we're not careful, we could end up in deeper trouble than we're prepared for. The words weighed heavily on her. She had thought they were chasing a truth, seeking out a mystery that would answer all their questions. But now, with every step closer to the warehouse, she realized they weren't just seeking the truth, they were walking straight into danger. They reached the edge of the building, its dark silhouette looming against the night sky. The warehouse was huge, its windows boarded up, the door shut tight. But the place didn't feel abandoned. It felt watched. She could almost feel the eyes on her, like someone was waiting, anticipating their arrival. Kyle stopped in his tracks, signaling for her to do the same. He motioned for her to stay close as he approached the door, checking it for any signs of entry. "It's locked," he said, his voice barely audible. But not for long. She watched as he pulled out a small tool from his jacket and went to work on the lock, his movements swift and precise. He didn't speak, didn't even look back at her, as though he had done this countless times before. His hands were steady, calm, like he was used to the thrill of breaking into places like this. When the door clicked open, the sound sent a shiver down her spine. They were in. The inside of the warehouse was nothing like she had imagined. It was vast, the ceiling stretching high above them, the shadows thick and suffocating. Old crates and barrels were scattered about, some overturned, some piled up, but the whole place felt eerily empty. Kyle motioned for her to follow him, and they moved cautiously through the space. Her breath echoed in the silence, her eyes darting from corner to corner, scanning for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, nothing except the hum of her own fear. They made their way toward the back of the warehouse, where an old metal staircase spiraled upward into the darkness. Kyle's eyes never left the staircase, his focus unshaken. "This is it," he said, voice tight. "The Red Wolf's operations center is up there. We need to be ready for anything." She nodded, though her stomach churned. She had no idea what to expect, what kind of world they were stepping into. They began to climb the stairs, the metal creaking beneath their weight. The higher they went, the darker it became. By the time they reached the top, they were barely able to see anything more than the faint outlines of doors and hallways. Kyle's hand found the door handle first. He pushed it open slowly, and they entered a small, dimly lit room. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a weak, yellowish glow over the room. The air was thick with dust and stale air, the walls covered in maps, papers, and photographs pinned up on bulletin boards. There were files stacked neatly in corners, and an old computer sat on a desk, its screen flickering erratically. "What is this place?" she asked, stepping forward, trying to make sense of the mess. "This is where it all happens," Kyle replied, his voice low. "Where the power is pulled. Where the deals are made. Where Stenholm operates." Her eyes fell on one of the maps, which was dotted with red pins marking locations across the globe, sensitive places, high-value targets. Her mind raced. "This is bigger than I thought." She reached for one of the papers pinned to the wall, scanning the document quickly. The text was typed in neat rows, but it made little sense to her. However, at the bottom, there was one name, one that stood out more than all the others. Arvid Stenholm. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it, the proof. This was where he was, this was his network. But there was something else here, too, something darker. She moved closer to the desk, where the computer sat, its screen flashing intermittently. There were files open, documents half-read, indicating someone had been here recently. "What is this?" she muttered, clicking through the files on the computer. The screen glowed to life, revealing a list of names. Some were crossed out, others were circled in red ink. Kyle stepped beside her. "Be careful," he warned. "If this is what I think it is." Before he could finish his sentence, the door behind them creaked open, sending a shock of panic through her veins. She spun around, her breath caught in her throat. A man stood there, silhouetted in the dim light. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, his features partially obscured by the shadows. But there was something about him, something that sent a chill through her. He looked familiar. Kyle's expression hardened. "Victor Kane," he spat. Her eyes widened. The name that had been haunting them from the start, the man who was supposed to be their biggest enemy, was standing right in front of them. Kane stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the space with cold precision. "I see you've made yourselves comfortable," he said, his voice smooth, but with an edge of malice. "Why are you here?" Kyle demanded, his voice sharp. Kane's lips curled into a faint smile. "You don't honestly think I'd let you dig around in my operation without consequences, do you?" She felt her heart pounding in her chest, but something in the way Kane spoke, something about his calmness, made her stomach twist in fear. "You've been hunting me, hunting my people, trying to destroy everything I've built," Kane continued, his gaze never leaving Kyle's face. "But you're not going to stop me. Not now. Not ever." The silence in the room thickened, her pulse roaring in her ears. Kyle was tense, his body coiled like a spring, ready to act. But Kane wasn't fazed. He stepped forward, reaching into his jacket pocket. She braced herself for what came next. But instead of pulling out a weapon, he threw a thick envelope onto the desk. "You've been looking for answers. You've been digging into things you don't understand," Kane said, his voice low and almost pitying. "Inside that envelope are the answers you want. The truth you've been chasing. But beware, truths like these come with a price." He turned, his coat flaring slightly as he made his way to the door. "Take it," he said, his voice drifting back toward them. "It's your choice. You can know everything, or you can leave this place with nothing. But the clock is ticking." And with that, he was gone. She stared at the envelope, the weight of his words sinking in. The truth. The answers. But at what cost? What was inside? Kyle stepped forward cautiously, picking up the envelope. He looked at her, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "We have to know what's in here," he said. "But we need to be careful. Kane won't leave us alone." The air between them thickened, and for the first time, she felt the full force of what they were up against. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The envelope sat in front of her, untouched for what felt like hours. Her fingers hovered over it, but she couldn't bring herself to open it. She knew the moment she did, there would be no going back. The world they had been uncovering, the truth, the lies, the dangers, would all rush forward, faster than she could comprehend. And in that moment, her future, and possibly her survival, would be sealed. Kyle stood beside her, his expression unreadable. He hadn't spoken since Kane's visit. His eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked from the envelope to her face, then back to the desk. Every muscle in his body was taut, ready for action. He wasn't a man who hesitated. But this was different. "You don't have to do this," Kyle said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost soft, but there was an undeniable weight to it. "You don't have to open it. You've already learned so much. Do we really need to know more? Do we really want to?" She glanced at him, her mind swirling with confusion. "What do you mean?" "This is everything we've been chasing. The answers. The truth about Arvid Stenholm, the Red Wolf, Kane, it's all in there, isn't it?" Kyle exhaled slowly, his fingers running over the edge of the envelope as if weighing its contents. "You don't understand. The truth isn't just a piece of paper. It's not just words on a screen. Once you know, there's no turning back. We'll be marked. We'll be targets. Kane is playing us. This is his game." Her heart pounded. "So, what are you saying? We just walk away? Leave this place and forget everything we've learned? After everything? Kyle's jaw clenched. No. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, think carefully. We're in deep, deeper than we ever intended to be. The Red Wolf isn't just some shadowy organization, it's an empire. Stenholm's empire. And opening that envelope, it will pull us into the heart of it. She felt a lump form in her throat. Kyle's warning wasn't without reason. She had seen enough to know that they weren't just dealing with a criminal organization, they were up against something far more dangerous, something far more powerful. Every step they had taken, every revelation they had uncovered, had led them here, to this moment. But now that they were here, did she really want to open Pandora's box? Her eyes lingered on the envelope. It seemed to mock her in its silence. What was inside? What price would they have to pay? Kyle, she said softly, her voice trembling. I need to know. I can't turn away now. We've come this far. I can't stop. Kyle met her gaze, his expression hardening, though there was something almost reluctant in his eyes. Then let's do it. With a deep breath, she grabbed the envelope, her hands shaking as she tore it open. Inside was a stack of papers, thick, official-looking documents, maps, photographs, and a flash drive. The first page was a letter. She scanned it quickly. To those who seek the truth. The path you walk is not an easy one, and it is not without sacrifice. What lies ahead is a journey that will change everything you thought you knew. Arvid Stenholm is a man with a singular purpose, to control the world through manipulation and power. He has no allegiance, no morals, no boundaries. His influence stretches far beyond the criminal underworld. He controls governments, corporations, and even the global economy. The Red Wolf is not just a name, it is the foundation upon which he built his empire. And you have found the key to it. Inside this package are the secrets you seek. But know this, the price of this knowledge is high. It will cost you more than you can possibly imagine. I hope you are prepared. A friend. She felt a chill crawl up her spine as she finished reading. The letter wasn't signed, but it was clear, the sender knew more about Stenholm and his operation than anyone could have imagined. But the warning was just as clear, knowledge of this magnitude came with consequences. She turned the page. The photographs were the first thing that caught her attention. Some were of people she didn't recognize, others of places that seemed oddly familiar. Some images were of high-ranking officials, business moguls, politicians, figures who, on the surface, had no connection to each other. Yet they were all linked, their faces circled in red ink, their names scribbled below the images. But it wasn't until she flipped the next page that the weight of the documents hit her like a ton of bricks. There, on the page, was a list of names. A list of people who were connected to Stenholm, some willing, others not. Her eyes scanned the page. Some names stood out, senators, international diplomats, and even members of the royal family. All marked with red lines, as though they had been crossed off the list, yet their names still held significant power in the world. She quickly turned to the next page, and there it was. A map of the world, dotted with red pins in countries across every continent. Each pin marked a location tied to Stenholm's network, places where he exerted influence, places where his operations were already in motion. And right at the center, in bold letters, was a city she knew too well. Washington, D.C. She looked up at Kyle, her heart racing. It's bigger than we thought. Stenholm isn't just a criminal mastermind, he's pulling the strings everywhere. Kyle nodded, his face grim. I told you. It's not just about the money or power, it's control. Stenholm doesn't just run an empire, he controls everything. And the people on this list? They're the ones who are helping him do it. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the flash drive. This must have the rest of it. The real details. Kyle's eyes narrowed. We can't trust it, you know. It could be a trap. It could be everything we need, or it could be nothing but a bunch of lies designed to get us deeper into this mess. She didn't reply. She wasn't sure she could. She felt the weight of the decision settling into her bones. They could walk away now. They could put it all behind them. But something told her they couldn't. Not after everything they had seen. They had to know the truth, whatever the cost. She walked over to the desk and plugged the flash drive into the computer. The screen flickered, and a folder opened automatically. Inside were files, dozens of them, each labeled with names, dates, and locations. Her eyes scanned the first document. Operation Red Wolf, Final Report. The report was filled with meticulous details, about meetings, secret shipments, covert operations. But one thing stood out above everything else, the operation's endgame. She scrolled down. The document detailed the final phase of Stenholm's plans to destabilize global governments, to manipulate financial markets, and to control entire regions through carefully orchestrated chaos. The endgame. Phase 1, Economic Collapse. Targeting major financial institutions to create instability in the global economy. Phase 2, Political Instability. Creating false narratives and orchestrating crises to bring down key political leaders. Phase 3, Consolidation. Seizing control of key government positions and organizations to install loyalists in positions of power. She recoiled in horror as she read further. The global impact of Stenholm's operation was far more severe than anything she had imagined. He wasn't just pulling strings behind closed doors, he was setting the stage for a new world order, one where he would control everything. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the final line. We will move to the next phase in 48 hours. The deadline. It was now. Everything Stenholm had worked for was about to unfold. She stood up abruptly, her hands shaking. Kyle, he's going to do it. He's moving forward. In less than 2 days, the world as we know it could collapse. Kyle was already moving, grabbing his jacket and pulling it on. We have to stop him. We have no choice now. We have to move faster than he does. Her mind raced, the weight of the decision suffocating her. But how? How do we stop him when he's already this far ahead? Kyle looked her in the eye. We expose him. We take everything we've learned and use it. If we can get to the right people, the right officials, before he can make his move, maybe we can stop him. She nodded, though doubt lingered in her chest. The world was on the brink of a precipice, and they were standing on the edge. There was no going back. The truth had been revealed, but it was darker, more dangerous than they ever could have imagined. Let's go, Kyle said, his voice a low growl. And together, they stepped into the unknown. The clock was ticking. Every second felt like a lifetime, each tick a reminder that the world was on the brink of collapse. They didn't have time to think about what they were doing. They didn't have time to wonder if they were ready. All they had were the papers in their hands, the flash drive still plugged into the computer, and a deadline that was rapidly approaching. The warehouse was silent now, the hum of the computers and the echoes of their footsteps filling the otherwise still air. Kyle paced back and forth, his mind racing as he checked his phone for the 100th time, as if hoping some miracle would slow the clock. We need to act now, Kyle said, his voice tight, the usual calm replaced with a sense of urgency that was palpable. We can't wait any longer. She nodded, though her heart was heavy. She had known the risks from the beginning. She had known that this moment would come, but standing at the edge of it, facing the enormity of what was about to unfold, it felt like a nightmare. They weren't just trying to stop Stenholm, they were fighting to save the very fabric of the world itself. Every plan they'd made, every move they'd taken, had led them here. But the truth they'd uncovered wasn't just about exposing one man, it was about exposing a system that had been operating in the shadows for years. The Red Wolf was not just an organization. It was a force, an empire that stretched far beyond anything they could have imagined. And now, it was up to them to stop it. But how? How do you take down an empire? She looked at the files scattered across the desk. The names, the locations, the plans, it was all in front of her. All the pieces they needed to take down Stenholm and the Red Wolf. But they weren't alone in this fight. They had to move quickly, and they had to move smart. Kyle's voice broke through her thoughts. We need to get this to the right people. The ones who can actually do something about it. If we can expose this before he activates Phase 3, we might have a shot at stopping him. Her mind raced. But how do we get this to them? We can't just walk into a government office with evidence like this. We don't know who we can trust anymore. That's the problem, Kyle replied, his voice strained. The higher you go, the more you realize how deep this goes. We can't go through official channels, they're compromised. We have to get this to someone outside of the system. Someone who can move without raising any flags. Her eyes fell on the flash drive again. The media? If we can get this into the right hands, it'll cause enough of an uproar to get people talking. Kyle shook his head, his expression dark. That's a double-edged sword. If we leak this too soon, before we've had a chance to pull together all the pieces, it'll be too late. They'll label us as terrorists or radicals. Stenholm's people will be on us within hours, and we won't have a single ally left. The weight of their predicament pressed heavily on her chest. They needed help, but they couldn't trust anyone. Not even the people they thought were on their side. Then who? She whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Who do we trust? Kyle met her gaze, his eyes filled with determination. We do it ourselves. We finish what we started. We make sure this reaches the right people, the ones who are still out there, who haven't been bought. People like the independent investigators, the journalists who haven't been silenced, the agencies that still have a shred of integrity left. Her stomach churned. But we'll be exposed. It'll be a war. We're already at war, he said simply. We've been fighting for our lives since the moment we uncovered Stenholm's operation. And now it's time to end it. A cold sweat formed on her skin as the full gravity of their mission set in. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the world as they knew it. They had seen how deep the corruption ran. They had seen the way Stenholm controlled everything, how his reach extended into every corner of the globe. He wasn't just a criminal mastermind. He was a god in his own empire. And they were the ones who had to take him down. She grabbed the flash drive from the desk and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Let's go. We'll get this to the right people. It's now or never. Kyle nodded, his jaw tight with resolve. Let's finish this. The two of them moved quickly, their footsteps echoing down the hallway as they left the warehouse. Outside, the night air was colder than it had been when they arrived, the city's skyline looming above them like an ever-watchful eye. The streets were empty, save for the occasional passing car, but the feeling of being watched never left her. Every shadow, every movement felt like a threat. They had to be careful. They had to move faster than they ever had before. As they walked, Kyle spoke in low tones, his voice barely audible. I've got contacts. We can get to them, but we have to make sure we're not followed. She nodded, her senses on high alert. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much danger they were really in. Stenholm had people everywhere, people who would kill to protect their interests. If they made one wrong move, everything they had worked for would be lost. They reached the car without incident. Kyle got into the driver's seat, and she slid in beside him, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on her chest. The flash drive was still burning a hole in her pocket, a constant reminder of what they were carrying. Kyle started the engine, and they drove in silence for several minutes. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, though she couldn't see any sign of it. Her mind raced as the city passed by in blurred streaks of light. She had to focus, to keep her head clear. They were close. They had to be. They made their way to an old, run-down apartment building on the outskirts of the city. The kind of place you didn't ask questions about. Kyle parked the car in the alley behind the building, and they slipped out, moving quickly through the back entrance. The place reeked of decay, stale air, broken windows, cracked tiles, but to Kyle, it was a safe house. A place where he had contacts who could help. As they entered, an older man stood waiting by the door, his face obscured in shadow. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a rough look about him. But his eyes were sharp, alert, and they scanned them both as if assessing their worth. "This is it," Kyle said, his voice a low growl. "Get them everything. And make sure it's secure. We don't have much time." The man nodded, his expression grim. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He knew what was at stake. She handed him the flash drive without a second thought. "Make sure it gets into the right hands," she said, her voice tight. "And don't let anyone stop you." The man nodded again and walked into the back room, his figure disappearing into the shadows. Kyle and she stood there, waiting in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The weight of the moment was suffocating. The game was in motion now. They had set everything in motion. And the final pieces were falling into place. It was then that they heard the sound, a distant rumble, like thunder in the distance. But it wasn't thunder. It was something far worse. The building shook. The floor vibrated beneath their feet. "No," Kyle whispered, his voice filled with dread. She turned to him, panic rising in her chest. "What's happening?" He looked at her, his eyes wide with realization. "They found us. They're here." The walls trembled again, louder this time. The building groaned as if it were about to collapse, and then, from somewhere above them, a loud crash echoed through the building, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They weren't alone anymore. She looked at Kyle, fear in her eyes. "We have to go. Now." He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the exit. But as they made their way through the back hall, the door in front of them burst open with a deafening crash. A group of men, armed to the teeth, stormed in. Kane's men. And they were ready to finish what they had started.